Hello Year 11s and welcome back to mathematics. In today's lesson I'm going to be going through the next section in your learning from home booklet. In this section we're going to be looking at something called absolute value functions. Now just to give you an idea of what this, I'm going to go through what absolute values are first of all and then go through the graph of an absolute value function after that. So let's go through this. What is an absolute value? Well, if you see an absolute value function, this is what it looks like. F of x is equal to, and we've got these two vertical lines around x. This is called the absolute values, or sometimes you might, so this is your absolute value sign, absolute value. Sometimes other textbooks might call it a modulus. I'm not sure about that one, but probably be safe, just call it an absolute value. And what this does in the definition I have underneath is the absolute value of a real number is the distance from the number from the origin on the number line without regards to its sign. So the distance from the number from the origin without regards to its sign. And so I have a few examples underneath. So the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of -5 is also 5. So what this is it basically takes any number, any real number, and it looks at the size of the number and it doesn't worry about whether or not it's positive or negative. It always chucks out the positive value. So sometimes we call this finding the magnitude of a number, or I have another one, or the size of a number. So it's the magnitude or size of a number. It doesn't worry about whether or not it's a positive or negative number. Just if you put it in the absolute values, it takes a size or magnitude and just gives you the positive version. Now to give you a bit of an idea of what it looks like, a few of you study physics, and in physics there's this concept called displacement. And for those of you who don't study physics, I'm sorry if you're learning about this for the first time and don't want to learn about physics. This will be very quick, I assure you. Now there's an idea called displacement. Now displacement and distance. Now displacement tells you how far you are from the starting point, but includes the direction that you're going from. So let's say I start out over here and I travel 10 meters this way. Displacement will tell me when I end up at this final spot, this is 10 meters north or something. Or if I travel out in a different direction, so for example, I would go 5 meters this way, this is 5 meters southwest. And so displacement includes a direction. However, if I'm just worried about, if I'm not worrying about which direction I'm going from my starting point, and I'm just worried about how far I travel, that's a thing called distance. So here, this is displacement, and my distance would just be 10 meters, and it don't say what direction I'm going in. So 10 meters is my distance, 5 meters is my distance for this one. And that's what the absolute value does. So absolute value is like taking the distance of a number from the origin. It doesn't worry about whether or not it's a positive or negative number. It just worries about what is the size of the distance I've traveled. Have I traveled 10 meters from the origin? Which direction have I traveled 10 meters? It doesn't really matter. All that's worried about is how far you've traveled. So here we've got a few examples where we actually work with the absolute value sign. So let's have a look at these examples. So we want to find the values of these numbers. So here, the first one, I've got the absolute value of 7. Now the absolute value of 7, I'm just looking at the distance, the size of this number. I don't care about the sign. And so here, it's a positive number. That number is just 7 units away from the origin. So the absolute value of 7 is just 7. Okay, hopefully that's okay with everyone. The next example is I want to find the absolute value of -7. Now, what the absolute values do is they take the magnitude or size. They don't worry about if it's a positive or negative number. It just takes the absolute value. It just takes the magnitude, of the number. So here, this number is 7 units away from the origin, but in the negative direction, all I'm going to write here is just 7 again. So here, the absolute value of -7 is just 7 again. Okay, the last one's a little bit trickier. The absolute value of 14 minus 9 minus 10. Now, if we were doing this, what we want to do is we want to evaluate the things inside the absolute values first, and then chuck on the absolute values after. So let me just evaluate the things in the operations inside my the expression inside my absolute values. Let me try that again. Okay, so I'm going to have my absolute value sign. I'm going to do 14 minus 9, which is positive 5, and then 5 minus 10, which is negative 5. So here I'm going to take the absolute value of negative 5, which just gives me, well, what's the absolute value of negative 5? That just gives me 5. So here, absolute values, we're just looking at the distance of a number from the origin without the sign. So we take the magnitude or the size of the number and don't worry about the sign.